We're all human beings. We all make mistakes. I've apologised for them.
Hello and welcome to episode 25 of Radio Cricket. That's 25, the same number of tears that Ravi Jadeja cries during the average Champions League match. And I'm joined tonight by none other than Ravi Jadeja's former moustache trimmer, who mysteriously disappeared to Panama after he was accused of taking advantage of his client. It is the one, the only, James Marsh.
Yes, hello Nishant. Yes, you'd be surprised the things you can swap a bag of Ravi Shastri moustache clippings for in the back streets of Soho. But yes, as you say, these good times can't last. Anyway, how are you? What have you been up to?
I've been doing very well, James, and I've been doing even better this week thanks to the breaking news that Kevin Peterson and the ECB have finally made up.
Yes, joy has abounded from Delhi to Durban. So, Nishant, is it going to last?
Like all great romances, KP and the ECB have been going through somewhat of a rocky period recently. There were accusations that KP was playing away from home, and to be honest, it didn't really sit well with the likes of Giles Clark and Andrew Strauss, especially Andy Flower as well. But now it looks like all is well in the camp after the ECB realised that it couldn't really live without Kevin Peterson, and I kind of have to agree with them. It seems more of a situation of lesser of two evils, in the sense that it's better to have Kevin Peterson in the tent pissing out than outside the tent pissing in.
Well, yes, that's a lovely image you've created there with Kevin Peterson urinating all over Giles Clark. Very niche market for that sort of thing, I should think. But
I'd buy that DVD.
yeah, I imagine most people will believe Peterson's going to be about as welcome back in the England dressing room as Matthew Hayden would be at Sachin's felicitation. But I guess I'm slightly more optimistic about it because the whole much vaunted reintegration process did take rather less time than it took the average IPL side to exit this year's Champions League.
That is a low blow, James.
Well, maybe so, but no lower than I've gone before, Nishant. So anyway, I'll carry on. I don't doubt there will be lingering recriminations and gripes and grouches, but I can't help but think that everyone from Peterson to Swan to, god damn it, even Giles Clark himself might have used this 11-week period just to have a bit of a deep breath and say, I think we've all been a bit silly here.
Well, of course, in an ideal world, James, KP and the ECB would have kissed and made up, much like Harbhajan and Andrew Simons playing for the same side. But, as it turns out, the ECB have still tried to mess around Kevin Peterson as much as humanly possible, flying him all the way back from South Africa to England in the middle of the Champions League T20, in which he is playing for Delhi right now, one of the few Indian sides which hasn't covered themselves in shame, and in fact is on the verge of a semi-final slot as we speak. It does seem like the ECB are really just want to make Kevin Peterson know who's boss and try and curb his mercenary ways, but I don't see that there's any possibility that Kevin Peterson will stop being Kevin Peterson, and at the ripe old age of 33, I don't think that a leopard will change his spots. He still will cause a fuss within the England side, and England really just kind of have to put up with him and sort of utilise a policy of appeasement, perhaps.
Well, maybe so. I think I perhaps do have a slightly more benevolent attitude to all of them. Perhaps. I mean, I accept that Peterson might have an ego the size of Samit Patel's left buttock. I accept that Swan's banter might be more tedious than watching Jonathan Trott bat whilst listening to Bob Willis talk about watching Jonathan Trott bat, and that Broad has his hands on his hips more often than Mick Jagger in a hissy fit. But Nishant, I really don't think any of them are really awful blokes. I know you'll possibly disagree with me there. I'm taking the England football team as a reference point for awfulness. But it does just seem to me an utter farce it ever came to this. There was an interesting interview with Andrew Strauss in Monday's Guardian when he said that he thought Peterson's apology had been quite contrite and sincere, but it was quite intriguing that he admitted he'd written letters to his former players after he resigned as captain, but he didn't drop KP a line. Instead, in what I think is quite a genius piece of satire, he texted him. Now, Strauss says it was only because he wrote letters to the players involved in the ODI at the Rose Bowl after the Oval Test, and obviously Peterson wasn't there, but it would have been quite nice if Strauss had actually got Dale Steyn to text Peterson to say goodbye on his behalf, but you can't have everything. well, moving on. And Nishan, I hadn't had enough of dead rubbers in the Champions League, so on Saturday evening I switched over to watch Andre Nell's face. Contorted pile of old car tyres that it is, as everyone's most unlikely sex scandal cricketer was turning out for a World 11 against a Pakistan 11 in Karachi, which was the first time any form of international tour had come to Pakistan in over 3.5 years after the terrorist attacks against the Sri Lankan side. So, Nishan, were you quite heartened to see this?
Well, of course, it is essentially a baby step in terms of Pakistan's return to international cricket, but anything is a bonus. Any international sporting event that takes place in Pakistan and goes smoothly in the current climate is a huge bonus right now, but I still think it's going to be a long, long time before we see teams comfortable enough to return to Pakistan for extended tours, perhaps for the odd one-off match where perhaps recently retired ex-cricketers are more happy to take the risk when they're being paid a few $1,000s over a couple of days, but for extended tours and professional sportsmen in the peak of their careers, I can't see it happening for a while yet, to be honest, simply because the climate there is still pretty dangerous, still high terrorist alerts all the time, and still the massive presence of Qamar and Akmal in the Karachi suburbs.
Well, indeed, perhaps the biggest threats to Pakistani cricket there is. But it did have a slightly farcical air to it. The boundaries were smaller than Ravi Jadeja's agent's sense of shame. And it was... The World 11 did get hammered in both games, but the broadcasters did quite a sterling job of trying not to be rude about their performance. After about the 50th fumble and drop in the outfield, the commentator rather diplomatically suggested that the World 11 fielders seemed, quote, a little bit rusty, which was very much in the same way one might describe the Titanic as being a little bit rusty. But overall, it did have a certain sense of joy to it, the whole thing, even though it did have this slightly artificial air. And, well, yes, I think it is important for the next generation of Pakistan players and fans that cricket can return. But I suppose the thing is, as well as getting teams to go back out there might also be an understandable reticence from umpires and officials to head out as well, of course, with Chris Broad and Simon Taufel, among others, were caught up in the Lahore attacks. But let's hope that the weekend's matches, alongside Asad Rauf's recent notable work furthering international relations with the Indian youth demographic, are just another move in the right direction for seeing cricket back in Pakistan.
Well, that brings us to the end of another episode of Radio Cricket. Thank you very much once again for joining us. I'm Nishant Joshi, and I leave you with the news that the Lions are through to the semi-finals of the Champions League T20. I don't know about you, James, but I'm really looking forward to seeing more of De Kock.
Well, yes, indeed, Nishant. I'm always happy to see De Kock, even if it is in a semi. That's all from us. Goodbye.
I think it was a very poor performance, one of the worst things I have ever seen done on a cricket field. Good night.